The U.S. Titan drifted through the empty expanse of space, its sleek frame cutting through the void like an old relic of another time. To anyone looking from a distance, it might have appeared insignificant, just another forgotten craft in the galaxy's vast sea of stars. But within it lay a crew determined to prove themselves despite being cast aside by the very powers that now ruled the galaxy. The Titan had a story of its own, a story of how humanity had refused to fade into the background. Captain Elena Harper stood on the bridge, her eyes scanning the star map before her. Despite the quiet hum of the ship, there was an unmistakable tension in the air. The crew had been expecting routine, nothing more than a dull scouting mission in a remote sector of space, nothing even close to worthy of their time. But Harper had always known that no mission was ever truly safe. No matter how small or insignificant it seemed, sometimes the quietest stretches of space held the most dangerous surprises. Her officers were a mix of veterans and newcomers. Many had come to her from older ships. Most of them had faced near destruction or witnessed the fall of battles they could never win, yet here they were aboard a ship that had seen better days, a ship no one had expected to last as long as it had. They were a crew bound together by something deeper than loyalty. It was survival that had brought them together, and survival that kept them going even as the rest of humanity seemed to grow further from them in their new alliance with the alien races of the galaxy. Elena paced in front of the command console, her hands clasped behind her back. As she watched the stars slip by, she could feel the weight of the silence pressing in from all sides. The crew members had grown accustomed to it. By now, the quiet hum of the Titan's engines had become a strange comfort in the cold vastness of space. They were used to being overlooked, their ship unworthy of attention from the other, more powerful factions of the galaxy. But Harper could sense that something was off. It wasn't just the silence or the uneventful nature of the mission. It was something deeper, like the calm before a storm. The communications officer, Lieutenant Riley, was the first to break the stillness. Her voice crackled over the intercom, soft but urgent. "Captain, there's something strange in the area, an anomaly of some kind. It's a transmission not from any ship we know of." Harper raised an eyebrow. The transmission was faint, barely noticeable to anyone else, but to her it was a warning. This wasn't supposed to be a quiet mission. After all, she moved quickly to the comm station. "Give me the coordinates, Riley, now." The transmission was coming from an uncharted sector known for its abandoned trade routes, an area so remote that even the most seasoned captains avoided it. The crew had only ever used it as a shortcut, but now it was different. Something about it didn't sit right with Harper. The transmission was growing stronger. It wasn't random, it was deliberate. That's when it hit her. They weren't alone. Someone was out there waiting, watching for them. But who or what remained a mystery. It was too late to turn back now. The Titan had already entered the sector, and Harper could feel the first stirrings of danger, the kind that didn't always announce itself with explosions or flashing lights. Sometimes danger was quieter. It crept in, slow and silent, ready to strike when least expected. The U.S. Titan drifted deeper into the sector, the strange transmission still echoing through the comms like a silent alarm. No one could ignore. Harper stood at the center of the bridge, her gaze locked onto the dark expanse of space outside the ship's windows. The crew moved about cautiously, their eyes darting from their stations to the captain, as if waiting for her command. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from one of routine to one of quiet anticipation. They all felt it, the threat in the air, though none could name it yet. Lieutenant Riley continued to monitor the transmission. It was stronger now, clearer, and much more structured than anything the crew had encountered in their previous missions. Her fingers flew across the console, trying to decode the signal. The transmission wasn't of human origin. That much was clear. It wasn't a distress signal or a call for help. It was something else, something deliberate, something powerful. Harper knew they were too far in to turn back. The sector was empty of other human ships, and with the Titan's outdated systems, there was no immediate way of communicating with command, even if they had the resources to do so. The feeling of isolation grew heavier with every passing minute. A sense of foreboding clung to the ship, as if the universe itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Then it came, a sudden shift in the sensor readings. A massive object appeared on their radar at the edge of the system, moving fast, too fast for the Titan to avoid. Harper's heart skipped a beat As she leaned closer to the console, "What the hell is that?" she whispered. The object was not a ship, not anything they recognized. It was huge, its form dark and almost organic in shape. It was massive, far too large to be anything humanity could build, and it was coming straight for them. Riley's voice broke through the tension. "Captain, it's not alone, it's a fleet. There are more objects emerging from the shadows of the sector. They're all heading in our direction." Harper's stomach dropped. The Titan had no chance against a fleet like this, no way to fight back or even escape. Her mind raced. She had to make a decision, and fast. The crew was depending on her to keep them alive, but the odds seemed impossible. The fleet was too far advanced, too powerful. The captain's hand clenched around the edge of the command table, her eyes narrowing as she studied the fleet on the screen. They were closing in fast, and there was no time to run, no time to call for reinforcements. The humans didn't have the luxury of overwhelming numbers or superior technology, but they had something else, something that could give them a chance. The one thing the aliens had likely underestimated: the most human ingenuity and resolve. Captain Harper's voice rang out across the bridge as she issued her orders. "No hesitation, no fear, we fight back. Prepare the ship for combat." Every single member of the crew moved as one, instinctively falling into place. They were a team bound by the same unspoken promise. They would face this threat together, and they would not go down without a fight. The alien fleet drew closer, the monstrous ships filling the view screen, their designs sleek and sinister, as if they were predators closing in on prey. Yet the Titan remained defiant. At its center, a small human ship whose crew had something to prove to the galaxy and to themselves. The first shot was a blur of light as it cut through the darkness of space. The blast from the Etheri fleet's lead ship sent shockwaves through the Titan's hull, rattling the crew to their bones. Alarms blared across the bridge, the lights flickering as the ship rocked under the force of the attack. The Titan's shields held, but just barely. The crew braced for the next strike, knowing it was coming fast and relentless. Captain Harper's voice was calm but firm as she barked out orders. "All hands brace for impact, evasive maneuvers. Now get us out of their firing range." Harper's hands flew across the controls, her mind sharp as she directed the Titan in unpredictable zigzags. The ship lurched as they began to weave through space, the massive Etheri ships giving chase. But the Titan was smaller, faster. Despite its outdated systems, it had a nimbleness the larger vessels could not match. Lieutenant Riley's fingers were a blur as she worked to keep the ship's systems intact. They were barely holding onto the fragile shields. Every time they were struck, the Titan seemed to groan, as if it might collapse under the pressure. But still the crew fought on. Riley's voice came through gritted teeth. "Captain, we can't keep dodging forever. They're locking onto our position. The Etheri are reading us like an open book." Harper's gaze never left the view screen, her mind working furiously to find a solution. The Titan was too outclassed by the alien technology. The Etheri had weapons that could vaporize them in an instant, but it was their tactical advantage. She had to exploit the one thing that might turn the tide. She had to make the Etheri doubt themselves. They needed a plan that would make them hesitate just for a moment, and in that moment they would strike. She gritted her teeth, her eyes flashing with resolve. "Bring us close to their command ship. Get us inside their weapons range, full speed ahead." Riley looked up, her face pale from the stress, but she nodded, working quickly to adjust the ship's trajectory. "You heard the captain. Hang on tight, everyone. We're going." And Riley's fingers danced over the console as the Titan shot forward, weaving through enemy fire, narrowly dodging incoming blasts. The Etheri fleet opened fire once more, but this time something unexpected happened. Harper had ordered them to get too close to their target. The Etheri commanders had miscalculated their distance. The ship's point defense systems struggled to adjust in time. They were too focused on hitting the Titan with overwhelming firepower to realize they had given up their own position. Harper smiled just slightly and gripped the command console tighter as the Titan closed in on the lead Etheri ship. She knew this move would be risky, but it was the only one that could create the opening they needed. "Now, Lieutenant Harris, in the weapons bay, fire when we're in range. Fire at their weapon systems all at once. Don't give them time to react." The bridge went quiet for a split second as the crew held their breath. Then the Titan shuddered as the ship's weapons, let loose, the concentrated fire tore into the Etheri command ship's weapons array. The ship faltered in its path, its defensive systems failing to stop the barrage of human firepower that now rained upon them for the first time in this battle. The Etheri were caught off guard. The Etheri fleet recoiled as their flagship staggered under the blows. Harper's heart pounded in her chest. She knew this was the moment, this was their chance to turn the tide. The Titan's fire rang out through the darkness, and for a moment the battlefield was silent. The Etheri flagship staggered under the assault, its once imposing presence now a smoldering wreck. Their weapon systems disabled, their shields flickering like dying embers. The crew of the Titan held their breath, waiting for the inevitable retaliation, but none came. Instead, a brief moment of chaos swept through the Etheri fleet as their command ship floundered under the pressure. Harper didn't hesitate. Now was the time to capitalize on their success. All hands target their remaining vessels. Focus on the next ship in line. Bring us in tight, she snapped. The crew moved swiftly, their training taking over as the ship adjusted its trajectory, angling toward the next target, a massive warship that had previously been keeping its distance from the battle. Lieutenant Riley was already at her station, eyes wide with concentration. Captain, we're getting strange readings. The rest of their fleet is starting to move. They're regrouping. Harper's eyes narrowed. It was as if the Etheri had been stunned for a moment, but now they were preparing for a counterattack. She could feel the shift in the air, the tension building again. The battle was far from over. The Titan had dealt them a significant blow, but the Etheri were not going to retreat so easily. Their fleet began to organize itself once more, and the energy in the air shifted from uncertainty to bloodlust. The ships moved into position with deadly precision, their weapons powering up again, and Harper could feel the weight of the moment. The stakes were higher than ever, and one mistake could cost them everything. She gripped the command console tighter as the Titan barreled toward the next Etheri ship, with no intention of slowing down. Lieutenant Harris, in the weapons bay, focus on their engines. Hit them as hard as you can, slow them down. The orders were precise, calculated, the crew working in perfect harmony as they prepared for the next wave of attacks. The massive warship loomed ahead of them, its weapons primed and ready. Harper's heart raced. She knew this was a desperate gamble, but it was the only play they had left. They couldn't afford to keep dodging indefinitely. They had to hit the Etheri hard again and again until they broke the will of their commanders. With a roar, the Titan's weapons fired again, this time striking the heart of the Etheri ship's propulsion systems. The alien vessel shuddered violently and began to drift in space as its engines sputtered and failed. The Etheri had lost their advantage in speed and mobility, and for the first time in the battle they were on the back foot. The Etheri flagship, still struggling to regain its balance, was no longer the threat it had once been. Harper could feel the change in the air. As the momentum began to shift, she knew they had wounded the enemy, but there was no time to celebrate. The rest of their fleet was still a serious threat, and they had no idea what kind of retaliation the Etheri might be preparing. Captain Harper didn't wait for the next move. She barked out her orders once more. We're going to press the advantage. Follow their movements. We hit them before they recover. Don't give them time to breathe. As the Titan pressed on its battered frame, holding together by sheer willpower, the Etheri fleet tried to regroup, but they had already begun to falter. Their arrogance was gone, replaced by uncertainty. As the humans proved their resilience in the face of overwhelming odds, the crew of the Titan was determined not to let this chance slip away. Their hope was renewed, and they were ready for whatever came next. The Titan pressed forward, its battered hull holding together. By sheer force of will, the ship's crew worked tirelessly. With each passing second, the battle raged on around them. The enemy fleet no longer seemed as certain of victory, as it once had. Their flagship, a burning wreck, was a symbol of their faltering strength. But there was no time to rest, no time to savor the small victories ahead of them. Lay the looming challenge of dealing with the rest of the Etheri fleet. Harper stood at the command console, her eyes scanning the chaotic battlefield outside the bridge. The remaining Etheri ships were regrouping, but they were slower now, disorganized. The Titan's small size and agility had been its greatest asset in this fight, And as the crew continued to fight their way through the enemy forces, they began to realize something: they had underestimated the Etheri. They had never thought their human opponents capable of such a brutal and calculated response. Lieutenant Riley worked feverishly at her station. "Captain, the enemy is adapting. They've started to move in formations. They've coordinated their firepower, and they're coming at us with everything they've got." Harper gritted her teeth. The Etheri might be adapting, but they were still overconfident. They still didn't understand what it meant to face humanity's ingenuity in a fight where survival was the ultimate goal. "We're not giving them an inch," Harper said, her voice low and determined. She turned to her weapons officer. "Harris, hit their command systems. We're taking out their communications. Make them blind to each other. Hit them hard and fast. Keep them disoriented." The crew sprang into action, the Titan's weapons firing once more with deadly precision. But this time their target wasn't just the ships, it was the very heart of the Etheri fleet, their command and control networks. The Titan shuddered as it fired its weapons, tearing through the communication arrays of the nearest warship. The ship's response was immediate. The Etheri fleet began to frantically adjust its movements without their central coordination. They struggled to maintain any semblance of order, and the humans took advantage of this opening, launching a series of attacks designed to cripple their enemies one ship at a time. For the first time in this battle, the Etheri fleet was on the defensive, their once proud ships now faltering under the constant barrage of human firepower. Harper's heart raced, but she knew this wasn't the time to let up. Now was the time to strike while the enemy was disoriented. Before they could regroup, the Titan weaved through the wreckage of the fleet, its small frame darting between the larger alien ships as its weapons continued to wreak havoc. The Etheri were struggling to adjust their strategy, but it was clear they hadn't expected this kind of fight. Their pride and arrogance had been shattered. The humans had pushed them to the brink of defeat, and now the once mighty fleet was beginning to crumble under the weight of their own mistakes. Harper's eyes flicked to the view screen where the battle unfolded before her. The fleet that had once seemed unstoppable was now on the verge of collapse. The Titan had given them the upper hand, but they couldn't afford to make mistakes. Now they had to finish this before the Etheri could rally themselves for one last push. She knew the battle was far from over, but in that moment a spark of hope ignited within her. The humans were winning against all odds. The impossible was becoming reality, and the alien invaders were beginning to realize just how costly their miscalculations had been. The Titan cut through the wreckage of the Etheri fleet. The ships that remained were disoriented and fragile, no longer the imposing armada they had once been. Harper's mind raced as she barked out commands in rapid succession. It was working. The human ingenuity had cracked the once impenetrable facade of the alien superiority. But they weren't done yet. The Etheri were still formidable, and the remaining warships were desperate to recover their coordination. Harper could feel the shift in the atmosphere. The tide was turning, but it wasn't a guarantee. Yet the Etheri were a proud race, and pride could be a dangerous thing. They had underestimated humanity before, and now they were paying the price. But desperation was a potent force, and she knew that if the Etheri managed to regroup even for a moment, they could turn the tables on them. "Captain, they're beginning to spread out." Riley's voice echoed over the intercom, but it was tinged with a sense of urgency. "They're trying to escape the full perimeter. They're making a break for the edge of the sector." Harper's eyes narrowed as she stared at the view screen. The enemy was splintering, their once unified formation now breaking apart into smaller groups. They were scattering, but it wasn't a retreat, it was a tactical regroup. They weren't running, they were repositioning for a counterattack. "We're not letting them go," Harper snapped, full speed ahead. "We keep the pressure on Harris to take out their rear defenses. Hit them now." The weapons officer responded immediately, unleashing a barrage of firepower that slammed into the rear of the closest Etheri warship. The alien vessel rocked under the attack, its shields flickering before collapsing under the onslaught. The humans were relentless. They had the upper hand, and they weren't going to let it slip away. Harper's hands tightened around the control console as the Titan pursued the scattered remnants of the Etheri fleet. There was no room for mercy. Now she couldn't afford to let any of them slip away. The battle had been too hard won, and there was no telling when they'd get another chance to strike at the heart of the Etheri like this. She had to finish it. The remaining alien ships struggled to fight back. Their formation was broken, their systems damaged, But they still fought with the fury of a cornered predator. Harper knew that they were running out of time. The longer they kept up the chase, the more the Ithari would adjust their strategy, the more they would adapt, and the harder it would be to finish the fight. "We need to close the gap," Riley said, her voice tight. "Captain, they've reactivated their long-range weapons. They're preparing for a retaliatory strike." Harper looked up at the view screen and saw the unmistakable glow of the Ithari warships charging their energy cannons. The ships were preparing to launch their final attack, one last desperate stand against the humans who had dared to challenge them. "No retreat," Harper said firmly. "Bring us in close, keep them on their heels, don't give them time to breathe. We finish this now." With a determined cry, the crew of the Titan responded. As one, the ship surged forward, pushing its systems to their limit as it barreled toward the remaining Ithari ships. Harper knew the risks, but she also knew that in this final push the humans could claim victory if they just pressed hard enough. The Titan surged forward, its engines roaring. As it closed in on the last of the Ithari fleet, the remaining warships were spread out now, scattered but still deadly. They were trying to regroup, firing back with everything they had. The shields of the Titan flickered under the force of their retaliatory fire, but the crew pressed on undeterred. Harper's eyes were locked onto the view screen as the enemy ships prepared their final assault. The air on the bridge was thick with tension. Every crew member knew what was at stake. This was it, the final push that would either bring victory or seal their doom. Lieutenant Riley was already at her station, her fingers flying across the console. "Captain, they've locked onto us. They're ready to fire." Harper's mind raced. She could see it in her mind's eye. The enemy ships charging up their weapons, the deadly beams of energy that would tear through the Titan's fragile hull if they didn't do something now. The thought of losing her crew, her ship, her people was a weight that pressed heavily on her heart. But there was no time to dwell on it. They had one shot, and they had to take it. "Harris," she said through gritted teeth, "hit their engines, fire at the propulsion systems, take them out. We can't let them escape." The weapons officer acknowledged with a swift nod, and a few seconds later, the Titan's weapons roared to life, firing directly at the propulsion systems of the nearest Ithari ship. The blast struck true, and the alien vessel staggered as its engines erupted in a burst of flame and smoke. The ship lurched violently and began to spin out of control. It was a small victory, but it gave the humans an opening, one they couldn't afford to waste. The Titan pressed on, weaving between the remaining enemy ships, its guns tearing into their hulls and systems without mercy. The Ithari were struggling now. Their coordination was faltering again. They hadn't expected the humans to keep up the pressure, to fight so relentlessly, but they had underestimated humanity's drive for survival, and now they were paying the price. Harper's eyes never left the view screen as she continued to issue orders. Hit their weapons, take out their defenses, target their control systems. Make them blind again, make them panic. The crew was working in perfect harmony, their movements swift and precise. The Titan was no longer just a ship, it was an extension of their will, an embodiment of their defiance against an enemy that had sought to crush them. The Ithari ships were falling one by one, their weapons going silent as their command systems and engines were destroyed, their firepower weak and scattered, unable to land the devastating blows they had once delivered so easily. The once imposing fleet was now a shadow of its former self, and Harper knew they were close to breaking. The final blow was near. They could taste victory in the air, but they had to finish it. The last of the Ithari ships turned to flee, its engines strained to push it forward, but it was too late. The Titan was already on top of it, closing the gap with deadly speed. The final warship had no room to maneuver, and Harper's voice rang out, "One last order, finish it now, with everything we've got." And with that, the Titan's weapons fired once more, its final barrage tearing through the alien ship's weakened defenses. For a moment, everything was still. Then the Ithari warship exploded in a fiery burst, the shockwave rippling across the space around it. The battle was over, and the Titan stood victorious, its hull battered and scarred but intact. The silence that followed the destruction of the last Ithari warship was deafening. The bridge of the Titan was filled with the sound of heavy breathing and the soft hum of the ship's systems slowly returning to normal. The crew stood still in the aftermath of the battle, the tension in the air finally beginning to lift. Their eyes were fixed on the view screen, where the remnants of the alien fleet drifted like broken husks of their former glory, the once unstoppable force reduced to wreckage and debris. Harper stood at the center of the bridge, her eyes scanning the shattered fleet, her chest tight with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. They had done it. They had actually done it. Against all odds, the human crew of the Titan had defeated an alien force far superior in technology and numbers. But the price of victory was written in every scar and every bruise that marred their ship and their spirits. Lieutenant Riley broke the silence. Captain, their systems are down. The Etheri fleet is completely disabled. No further movement readings. Harper exhaled a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She allowed herself a moment of quiet gratitude before her commanding voice returned to the bridge. We're not finished here yet. Send out a distress signal to command. Let them know we've neutralized the threat. We need to regroup and begin repairs. Riley acknowledged the order with a sharp nod and moved to carry it out. Harper's gaze shifted to the remaining crew members, each one still at their stations, though their eyes were filled with exhaustion and awe. They had given everything to win this battle. Their resolve had never wavered, even in the darkest moments. When they were outgunned and outclassed, they had fought with everything they had, and now they stood as the victors of a war that had seemed impossible just hours before. She looked over at Lieutenant Harris, who had been instrumental in the fight. His hands still gripped the weapons controls, his face streaked with sweat, but his eyes were filled with a quiet pride. Harris' status report on the weapons systems. The lieutenant glanced up from his console. The systems are damaged, but we can still fire, Captain. They're operational, though we'll need repairs to ensure we're fully functional again. But for now, we're in one piece. And that's all that matters. Harper nodded. It was all that mattered. The Titan had survived. And so had they. Riley's voice broke through once more. Captain, we've received confirmation from command. Reinforcements are on the way. They've already dispatched a fleet to the sector. But it'll be a few hours before they arrive. Harper allowed herself the smallest of smiles. Good. Tell them we'll be here waiting. We've got this under control for now. The crew exchanged looks of disbelief and exhaustion, but there was no mistaking the satisfaction in their expressions. They had achieved the impossible, and now they stood as the ones who had broken the Etheri's invincible grip on the galaxy. They had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity could rise to the occasion. Harper turned her attention back to the view screen, where the wreckage of the Etheri fleet floated like a testament to their failure, but also a reminder of humanity's resilience and ingenuity. She knew the fight was far from over. There would be more battles to come, but for now they had won, and that was enough. The Titan had become more than just a ship. It had become a symbol of defiance and strength, and the crew knew it was their victory. As much as it was the ship's, they had written a new chapter in the story of humanity, one that would be told for generations to come.